In 1992, Land Rover estimated that 70% of all the Land Rovers they'd ever made were still on the road. The Land Rover is Britain's bulletproof off-roader, born out of Rover's post-war desperation, and became the indispensable go-anywhere vehicle. Like its famed bulletproof ruggedness, Land Rover production kept going and going and going. But with a brief gap of 4 years, the Land Rover is still with us and looks like it's not going away anytime soon. Let's off-road! This is the Land Rover Defender story. Before World War II, Rover made luxury cars, but after the war the government only allowed vehicle production that helped to rebuild Britain or could help with their export deficit. And forget about asking for steel, that was severely rationed. Rover's designer, Maurice Wilks, had been using an ex-US Army Willys Jeep on his farm and hit upon the idea of creating a similar vehicle for agricultural use, especially as his was getting worn out. He showed his idea to his brother Spen by drawing it in the sands of Red Wharf Bay. The first prototypes were built on a Jeep platform with an engine from the Rover P3 and featured a central steering wheel. The engine drive shaft could be used to drive farm machinery, and they tested it out by ploughing fields. A new 2-speed transfer box would give the car 4-wheel drive. The design was simplified to reduce costs, and the steering wheel was moved to the normal driving position. The result was a vehicle that didn't use a single Jeep component. It was slightly shorter than its American inspiration, but wider, heavier and faster. It used aluminium alloy bodywork as the government was rationing steel. But this turned into an asset as it didn't rust in the harsh conditions it was exposed to. The Land Rover, as it was called, was launched in 1948 and helped with the government's push for export orders, selling all around the Commonwealth, including to the Australian government, who used it for civil engineering projects. This helped to fire the Australian public's love for the car, and by 1950 Land Rovers were also being assembled in South Africa. British customers warmed to the new type of vehicle and were soon off-roading across farms. Early examples were a light green, reusing surplus aircraft cockpit paint from the war. It initially used a 1.6 4-cylinder engine, which was increased to 2 litres in 1950. The car was simple and utilitarian, and management were concerned long-term sales would suffer if the car wasn't made a little more comfortable. So in 1949 they released the 80-inch station wagon, essentially a short wheelbase Land Rover with a few extra refinements such as a heater and an all-aluminium body over a wooden frame. But it was expensive to produce and not many were sold, so Rover withdrew it from the market in 1951. The Land Rover was classified as a commercial vehicle, which meant it was free from purchase tax. However, it also meant it wasn't allowed to go over 30 miles an hour on British roads. By the early 1950s, it was reclassified to multi-purpose vehicle, which meant it could go normal speeds on the roads, but also meant it was subject to purchase tax. In 1954, the 80-inch wheelbase was expanded to 86 inches, and a new 107-inch wheelbase version was built, which proved useful when Queen Elizabeth used it to tour Commonwealth countries. A special version was presented to wartime Prime Minister Winston Churchill that same year, which he used to tour his estate. The British Army had initially chosen the Austin Champ for its light military vehicle, but it soon became clear that the Land Rover was more reliable, half the price, and could do 80% of what the Champ could do, so they quickly switched. By 1955, a 5-door version with room to seat 10 people was launched, useful as a small troop carrier. The Land Rover's size was altered once more in 1957, and Rover offered a new 2-litre high-speed diesel engine which was designed specifically for road use. With the Land Rover getting worldwide exposure through royal visits, plus government and military purchases, the Land Rover started to be used around the world, from the outback to deserts to war zones to the country farm. The Series 2 Land Rover arrived in 1958. It was lightly restyled by in-house Rover designer David Bache to round off those rough edges. It quickly gained an updated 2.2-litre petrol engine that would be used in Land Rovers until the mid-1980s. The long wheelbase version could now carry 12, admittedly very cramped people, even though it wasn't any bigger. This was because of UK tax rules that classified any vehicle that could carry 12 people or more as a bus, and it was therefore exempt from certain taxes. This meant that it wasn't only cheaper than the 10-seat Land Rover, but also cheaper than the 7-seater short wheelbase model. Just 3 years after the Series 2, the Series 2A was launched. The changes were minor, but it got a new 2.2 litre diesel and 2.6 litre petrol engines. By now they were being modified into many different types of off-roading vehicle, and it helped that the Meccano-like construction allowed infinite different configurations. With go-anywhere hovercrafts gaining prominence, the British Army requested Land Rover design an amphibious off-roader. The car, or was it a boat, had a custom-built chassis and a watertight hull. The hull was fitted with polyurethane foam that meant the boat car was relatively impervious to small arms fire. Although a clever piece of engineering, it unfortunately didn't go into production. In 1962, a special forward control version was launched with the cab over the front wheels to give it more loading space. The axles were uprated and it got larger wheels to spread the additional weight. With the existing small engines, they were underpowered, but provided a good way to move people and equipment around. Production continued until 1974, when the Land Rover range was rationalised. By 1968, Land Rover had been subsumed into British Leyland. The car celebrated its 20th birthday, with total production just shy of 600,000. More than 70% had been exported, making it a British success story, and sales were growing stronger year by year. In 1969, over 60,000 were sold. In Australia, it proved so popular that it held 90% of the 4x4 market, in a country that gave off-roaders a good workout. It had similar market dominance in Africa and the Middle East. Although the more refined Range Rover was launched in 1970, the Land Rover continued to be produced and was updated to the Series 3 in 1971. Changes again were small, with the main difference being the headlights that were moved outwards to comply with Australian, American and Dutch regulations. The dashboard was updated, an optional more comfortable interior trim was introduced, and it finally got synchromesh on all its forward gears. But British Leyland realised that while the Land Rover was selling well, it was looking a little long in the tooth. In the early 1970s, they started planning for a low-cost and easy-to-produce replacement. The SD5 concept borrowed heavily from the Range Rover design, and a test version had temporary Range Rover body panels that would have been changed before production. But with British Leyland going broke in 1975 and the Land Rover continuing to sell well, selling its 1 millionth car in 1976, the project was cancelled. But competition was coming, with the Toyota Land Cruiser and Nissan Patrol making significant inroads into the 4x4 market in Australasia and Africa with their more powerful V6 engined cars, and they were easier to get a hold of. Land Rover production was limited and it was a long boat ride from the UK, which meant long waiting lists. To remain competitive, Land Rover fitted the V8 from the Range Rover along with its constant four-wheel drive system to give it considerably more torque. And in 1976, Land Rover of Australia launched the special edition Game short wheelbase version to fend off the Japanese competition and appeal to the emerging recreational four-wheel drive market. Lower production quality hit British cars in the late 1970s, and the Land Rover was seen as underpowered, unreliable, rust-prone and with poor ride quality compared to its Japanese rivals. Despite offering a 3.9 litre Isuzu diesel engine, by 1983 the Toyota Land Cruiser was the #1 selling 4x4 in Australia. The Land Rover was updated again in 1983, with the short wheelbase and long wheelbase versions now being known as the 90 and 110, which was roughly their wheelbase in inches. You wouldn't think Britain went metric in the 70s, would you? The outside was very similar to the Series 3, with a revised front end and taller one-piece windscreen, but the internal changes were significant, with a more modern interior. The Land Rover also gained coil springs for an improved ride. However, it retained sliding windows that would only be upgraded to wind-up windows in 1984. By the early 1980s, the Land Rover was being marketed to new customers that wanted them as sport recreational vehicles, and these customers demanded a higher level of trim. With the new model's better ride and better trim, this helped Land Rover take a piece of this growing market. The new 127-inch wheelbase model was used primarily by utility companies and the military, It could carry more volume and weight, up to 1.4 metric tons, and was custom made by cutting a 110-inch chassis in two and welding 17 additional inches in the middle. With the more powerful 3.5 litre V8 engine, this wasn't a slow-plodding truck like the 1962 Ford Control. The Australian Army needed 1-ton and 2-ton military transports, and Land Rover won the bid in 1987. They were called the Perenti after the Australian giant goanna lizard. The 2-ton was specifically constructed with 6 wheels to spread the additional load. Although sales in Africa, Australasia and the Middle East continued to decline, sales in the UK and Europe rebounded. Throughout the 1980s, the Land Rover engines were improved, with a new turbo diesel arriving in 1986, and this helped to improve sales. With the Land Rover Discovery's launch in 1989, management could see the naming of the Land Rover was causing confusion, so it was renamed to the Land Rover Defender in 1990. The new 200 TDI Discovery engine gave it 25% more power. With this new engine, the car became much more refined at high speeds and was better at pulling heavy loads. The Land Rover 127 became the Defender 130 with a dedicated chassis built from scratch, although despite being called the 130, it was still 127 inches in length. With the Land Rover Discovery a success, in 1991 a more utilitarian version was developed, dubbed the Challenger. It's not clear if this was to be a Defender replacement, but with management wanting to consolidate all Land Rovers into one chassis, this seems likely. Alas, like many prototypes, this one didn't come to production. But the car was starting to show its age. By 1997, it couldn't be sold in the USA as it failed safety regulations. BMW bought Land Rover in 1995, and with the classic Mini being redesigned for the millennium, Land Rover again thought of updating their classic 4x4 in 1997. The prototype was dubbed the LCV for Lightweight Concept Vehicle, and the goal was to produce a more fuel-efficient off-roader that could do 40 miles per gallon. The car was developed into the LCV 2/3, but with BMW focusing on getting the Rover 75 and updated Range Rover out the door, something had to give, and yet again the Land Rover was left to soldier on without a major update. As the Range Rover and Discovery continued to move ever upmarket, the Defender also moved upmarket to fill the spot these cars had vacated. This trend was epitomised by the 50th anniversary 90 in 1998, equipped with automatic transmission, air conditioning and the Range Rover's 4-litre V8 engine. Land Rover of South Africa were let loose on the Defender, shoehorning a BMW 2.8-litre 6-cylinder engine into the car in a special project they completed with BMW. The result was the fastest ever Land Rover that could get to 60 miles an hour in 9.3 seconds. The 200 TDI was updated to the 300 TDI in 1994, but that itself fell foul of emissions rules by 1998, so was replaced by the more powerful TD5, again produced in-house. The BMW marriage proved to be an unhappy one. Apart from the Mini, the German company wanted to be rid of all its British assets, so sold Land Rover to Ford in 2000. The Defender kept on being produced with almost no changes, well except for the 2001 Tomb Raider Special Edition that let you feel like you were battling baddies like Angelina Jolie. By now it seemed the Land Rover had been forgotten. It got an update in 2007, but only to meet emissions and safety legislation. With Ford calling the shots, it received Ford's Duratorque engines, a new 6-speed gearbox, and there was a new 110 utility model. Those inward-facing rear seats had been banned, so forward-facing seats were used instead. But it did get a new dashboard with instruments from the Discovery. But you could see the age in other components such as the 1980 Austin Metro indicator stalk and Morris Marina ignition switch. It's amazing that Land Rover could still source these parts after all these years. Ford was in deep financial trouble in the 2008 Great Recession, so Land Rover was sold again, this time to Indian behemoth Tata Motors. With the Defender still selling 25,000 cars a year, in 2011 the company once again looked to produce an all-new update, dubbed the Defender Concept 100 or DC100. The car was firmly aimed at the leisure off-roading customer, with cubbies designed specifically for extreme sports equipment, whatever that might be. Maurice Wilks would have been stunned what his simple farm utility vehicle had become, but it was designed to be affordable just like the original car had been at around £20,000. Land Rover announced the replacement would arrive in 2015. Christmas 2015 arrived, and instead of getting a new Defender in our stockings, we got a lump of coal. Land Rover announced it was the end of the line for the Defender due to the escalating safety regulations and a changing marketplace. After Land Rover announced it had sold 2 million Defenders in late 2015, the last one rolled off the production line in January 2016. Land Rover gave the die-hard Defender fans a ray of sunshine in 2018 when they sold 150 special edition V8 Defenders to mark the Land Rover's 70th anniversary. Like Monty Python's parrot, it seems the Land Rover wasn't pining, it had kicked the bucket, gone to meet its maker, shuffled off the mortal coil and was now pushing up the daisies. But then something truly remarkable happened. Late in 2018, Land Rover teased photos of a new Defender. It seems they were still working on that 2011 DC100 prototype, and it would soon be ready for release. The 2020 Defender starts a new chapter in the Land Rover's history, and they've even produced a Lego model as a tie-in, a car that's been sitting over my right shoulder all this time. It was a lot of fun to build it, and if you want your own, there are affiliate links in the description. The 2020 Defender continues the tradition of the Go Anywhere 4x4, started when Maurice Wilks drew his first idea in the sand. It's a car that helped Rover get through the lean post-war years, and it carried people and supplies to places they could never have got to before.
You love chocolate and you love cheese, so you love new cheesy chocolate. We take the finest cheddar cheese and add it to gourmet chocolate to bring you the new treat food and drink magazine called Disgusting and Turkish Airlines magazine Skylife called Barely Edible. Get yours today!
Cheesy chocolate may cause temporary blindness or loss of hearing. Do not eat before or after consuming food. What's the history of the Martini, and what did travelators look like in 1900 Paris? Get answers to these questions and more on my new sister channel Little Car in the link here. And if you want to help either channel, please subscribe or think about becoming a patron. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.